Evening, folks. It's a nice night outside. I figured I'd do this one out in the front yard as the kids are sleeping. Got a couple teenagers that are driving past here, so they may zoom by. A couple of them look like they need mufflers for their cars. But we're going to continue on with our examination of the biology textbook. We're still in chapter 10 on page 287. Again, we're examining the kind of precursor to Darwin and examining just the way the textbook presents them, examining what they presented, their ideas, and then we're going to kind of address that with a bit of logical rebuttal here. So the first one on our list is George Louis Lecirc de Buffon, and I don't speak French very well, and I certainly don't have a French accent, so I probably butchered that name, but it's certainly there for anybody to read. I'll post it up in the comments. Buffon, French naturalist of the 1700s, challenged many of the accepted ideas of the day. Based on evidence of past life on Earth, he proposed that species shared ancestors instead of arising separately. Now, we aren't told what this evidence is, but as stated, based on this evidence, I don't have any problems with species sharing common ancestors. I have no issue with lions and tigers and panthers and house cats and all those guys sharing a common ancestor. There's nothing wrong with that. There's no logical incompatibility with that, because when you have speciation, what you actually have is a loss of information in the genetic structure. And loss of genetic information in genetic structure is actually part of what entropy is all about. We do the same thing when we breed dogs. When you have purebred dogs, they lose information that relates to other possible breeds. So you get a mutt, they're very rich in genetic information, and they are capable of having more traits to pass on. Whereas if you have a purebred dog, there's not so many choices in the genetic code anymore. So that's a loss of information. So I don't have any problems with this as stated, but I would like to see what evidence that they're talking about so we could have a fuller conversation about that. But, you know, it is a high school textbook, and I don't have any problems with this as stated. But the next part, Buffon also rejected the common idea of the time that the Earth was only 6,000 years old. Man, I wonder where they got that idea. Why was the common belief at the time that the Earth was only 6,000 years old? But we're not allowed to talk about Bible in public schools, so we'll just move on. He suggests that it was much older. Well, he can suggest all he wants. Does he have any evidence for that? This argument was similar to that of Charles Lyell, a geologist whose work helped inspire Darwin's writings. And you'll read more about Lyell later in this section, according to the textbook. So they're alluding to this geological column stuff and the fossil record, and eventually, not these guys specifically, but the book will bring in radiometric dating. I got loads on that when we get to it, but if all they're going to do right now is hint at that, I'm not going to touch it just yet. The next one, Erasmus Darwin. Man, that's a familiar name. This is Charlie's grandfather. He was an English doctor and a poet, and he proposed, maybe poetically, that all living things were descended from a common ancestor, and that more complex forms of life arose from less complex forms. Okay. I do not have any issues with somebody who is not necessarily, sorry, the bugs are getting me. I don't have any issues with somebody who is not what we would call technically a scientist or formally a scientist proposing ideas. Anybody can be very well educated in a field that they aren't formally educated in. So there's nothing wrong with him proposing that, but he's proposing it based on what? You know, just throwing the idea out there, it's a hypothesis, but why are you proposing it? And here's the issue with it. If he had proposed it and I was able to talk to him about it, knowing what I know about physics, I would ask him, well, how is that not a violation of the law of entropy? The idea that more complexity comes from less complexity, more information in the genetic structure comes from less, is a violation of entropy. I already did a video on this back when I was doing them on YouTube, talking about how the biological evolution is the biggest, longest, most relentless form of the violation of entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, that man has ever invented. And when you talk about a loss of disorder, when you talk about putting things in order, that's nothing. We can talk about snowflakes, or we can toss some rocks up and they land in a circle. That's order. There's a pattern to it, but it's a simple pattern. DNA is not just order, it's organized complexity. It's purposeful complexity. Each genetic code, each A, C, T, and G has a specific purpose in the specific place that you see it in. Hey Josh, we're talking about the new biology textbook adopted by Clay County this year, and we're showing that some of the things that they say in this textbook are teaching that evolution is true when that is not lawful according to the Florida state standards. Is not what the board said back in February and has said repeatedly since 2008, so they're in violation of the law, and they're actually going against their own word. They're saying things that aren't true, and so I'm demonstrating that essentially page by page as I go through the biology textbook that they adopted. So I hope you'll stick around and listen in. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. So anyway, that Erasmus Darwin, that Charles' grandfather would propose that more complex life forms arise from less, that's a violation of the law of entropy in terms of genetic information, over and over and over again. And it's not just a one-time local event or whatever. It's relentless, overwhelming, constant in the entire biosphere. And that's just not how entropy works. It's just, you cannot do that. There's no inherent pattern within the chemicals. Again, I already touched on this in the video. I think it was video number 4. I'm wearing like a Superman shirt or something. Go back and watch that video, and I touch on it. But he's violating the law of entropy, which I don't know that Erasmus would have known all that much about. The time that he lived, I just don't know that he would have understood it at least as well as what we do today. So the next guy and the last guy on our list here is Jean-Baptiste. Our nightly lose connection for a second shows up here. It says, in 1809, the year of Darwin's birth, a French naturalist named Lamarck proposed that all organisms evolved toward perfection and complexity. Like other scientists of the time, he did not think that species became extinct. Instead, he reasoned that they must have evolved into different forms. Lamarck proposed that changes in an environment caused an organism's behavior to change, leading to greater use or disuse of a structure or organ, and the structure would become larger or smaller. As a result, the organism would pass on these changes to its offspring. So here's an interesting thing. Number one, he's repeating the same thing that Erasmus Darwin said, that life is heading towards more complexity, and again, we're violating the second law of thermodynamics, the law of entropy, that they're heading towards some sort of perfection, whatever that is. What standard are we using to say something is perfect? And if you don't have a standard, then there's no such thing as perfection. And as the environment changes and as the animals changes, it's a very complex dynamic system. There is no settling to perfection, because as the prey gets better at avoiding the predator becomes better at finding the prey. It's a back and forth, a circular spiral. There is no perfection in there. There might be equilibrium. The system can reach equilibrium, but that's not the same thing as perfection. So I'm not really sure what he was going for, saying that they evolved towards perfection. Don't know that I'll ever get to ask him. But it is a violation of the law of entropy. So there's that problem. And the other is that Lamarck proposed that the environment caused changes in an organism over the course of its life. And in the biology textbooks that I've read in the past, they show that he was incorrect about this. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But we now know that environment does not cause changes in heritable traits. So let's say the environment means I lost an arm. Somehow, in an accident, or something happens that I lose my arm. Well, I spend the rest of my life without an arm, and then I somehow choose to have a fourth kid, and I pass on not having an arm to them. That's what Lamarck is essentially proposing. Of course, that's an extreme example, but the extreme example is good at showing kind of the idea of what he was meaning there. So his proposal had lots of flaws, and the use or disuse of an organ. If somebody loses a kidney, if somebody loses a lung, say to cancer or something along those lines, that doesn't mean they're going to pass on the lack of that organ, or an organ that gets disused. My son had exotropia. He was vaccine injured when he was 1, and his eyes began to wander out. And had we not corrected the muscles in his eyes early enough, then one of those eyes would have become non-functional. And then he grows up, has children. Would he pass on that non-functionality in that one eye? No, that's not how it works. And so Lamarck was wrong here. And I'm not trying to spend a lot of time. Sorry, I got a piece of hair in my eye here, and it's kind of annoying me. My dad would say, "Get your hair cut." But I'm not trying to spend a whole lot of time dwelling on these guys that were wrong, because the biology textbooks actually says that in some ways they were wrong. What they're really trying to show here, though, is this is what Charles Darwin was drawing on to formulate his ideas. And so we can see that, and we can see what an impact his grandfather had on him as part of this. But again, this is, it says at the bottom, Lamarck's idea is known as the inheritance of acquired characteristics, but we know that that's false. One last thing before I sign off here. Up in the corner, it has another one of these little ironic little blurbs. It says, connect to scientific process. Recall from the chapter Biology in the 21st Century that in every scientific field, knowledge is built upon evidence gathered by earlier scientists. Well, number one, I think it's grand that we're talking about knowledge being built on evidence. So my question is where's the evidence for biological evolution? Because there ain't none. I still haven't seen any that demands. I've seen a lot of evidence, and I've heard a lot of things presented, but none of it demands evolution. But the other part of this is that knowledge is not just built on evidence gathered by earlier scientists. Sometimes it's built on, and I would say a lot of times, it's built on evidence gathered firsthand. I'm not going to sit here and just do things related to what I read some other scientists say. Now, I might read their submissions to scientific magazines, try to reproduce the results. But there's going to be times where I'm going to go down to the river and I'm going to dig up dinosaur fossils. I'm going to dig up the dinosaur footprints and find human footprints in them. There are going to be times where I'm going to perform experiments with a hyperbaric chamber and talk about how pressure can change the outcome of dating methods. So science is not just about drawing on the knowledge of scientists from the past and the evidence of scientists from the past. It's part of that. I mean, we owe a great debt of gratitude to men like Sir Isaac Newton, Michael Faraday, Nikola Tesla, maybe not so much Thomas Edison. Have different things to say about him. But anyway, so we do build on these guys to an extent. I'm not saying that's not true, but it's more than that. It's also about exploring the universe for ourselves. So just an ironic little blurb here again, because of the fact that it's talking about evidence gathered, and there is none for evolution. It's just speculation and circular reasoning. So that's all I got for tonight. That's the page. I got tomorrow's Friday. I'm hoping to continue this on a daily basis up until Election Day, which brings me back again to remind you guys. You got Betsy Condon and Latanya Peterson and Ashley Gilhausen all running for school board. They support critical thinking. They support being able to challenge things in the classroom. They want science in the classroom. They're not going to be like the superintendent and some of the other people who are running, who say you can't teach science in the science classroom if it contradicts what the government wants you to learn. So please go out and vote for these three ladies. Again, Betsy Condon and Ashley Gilhausen, Latanya Peterson. Get out. Get the early voting is through Saturday. Saturday is the last day. It's August 25th, and then the actual election day, where you have to go to a specific spot and vote based on your precinct, is on August 28th. So please get out and vote. And guys, thank you for watching. Please share this. I've found another venue to share this where I think some conversation is going to happen. I'm looking forward to that. But please share this, get the word out, especially to people who live in Clay County. And please keep learning. Y'all have a great night.